They call me Captain Rebel, but that designation came later after everything fell apart, and I needed something other than my real name attached to what I was about to expose. Before all of this, I was a sergeant in the United States Army, Special Forces with 18 years of service spanning 4 continents and operations in countries I still cannot officially acknowledge visiting while performing duties that remain classified to this day. I was never the type to chase conspiracy theories or hunt for extraterrestrial mysteries or government cover-ups, because my career had taught me that most classified secrets turn out to be mundane bureaucratic failures rather than the thrilling revelations people imagine. The phone call arrived on a Tuesday in February 2019 while I was stationed at Fort Bragg overseeing training cycles for incoming Delta Force operators when my commanding officer pulled me from the exercise field and informed me that someone from the Department of Defense Special Projects Division needed to speak with me immediately. That designation alone should have triggered every alarm in my head, because in nearly 2 decades of classified military work, I had never encountered any legitimate office called DoD Special Projects. The interview took place in a windowless conference room furnished with deliberately neutral furniture that seemed designed to be forgettable, and the man conducting the interview never offered his name or rank or agency affiliation, but simply told me I could address him as Mr. Graves. He spent the next 2 hours asking questions that had absolutely nothing to do with my combat record or tactical experience, and everything to do with my psychological resilience and cognitive flexibility. How do you process information that contradicts your fundamental understanding of reality, he asked me. I told him I adjust my world. You based on available evidence. What would you do if that evidence suggested technology that operates outside current scientific frameworks, he pressed. Then our scientific frameworks are incomplete, I responded. He nodded as though that answer was precisely what he had been hoping to hear. Then he posed the question that should have made me stand up and walk out of that room immediately. If you discovered that your government possessed capabilities that fundamentally challenged everything you believed possible, and you knew this information could never be publicly disclosed, could you maintain operational security indefinitely? I said yes, because that is what soldiers are trained to do. We maintain secrets, we follow orders, we do not question information above our clearance level. 3 weeks after that interview, I found myself on an unmarked military transport aircraft, flying into Nevada with 5 other personnel, none of whom I had ever met, and none of whom spoke during the entire flight, because people with our backgrounds understand operational security without needing explicit reminders. When we touched down at what I later confirmed was Groom Lake, the installation that officially does not exist on any government record, I still believed I was being assigned to a standard security detail protecting classified aerospace testing programs. The first 48 hours consisted of routine orientation briefings covering security protocols, facility history, and the standard compartmentalized need-to-know structures that govern all classified military installations. They assigned me to Security Team Echo with responsibility for an area designated as Special Projects Wing, specifically a structure they called Silo 7. The silos were not actually silos in any conventional sense, but massive underground complexes built deep into the desert bedrock, accessible only through reinforced elevator shafts that descended at least 300 feet below ground level. Silo 7 was the deepest structure and carried the highest security classification, requiring clearance levels I had never encountered even during my most sensitive deployments. My team leader was a former Army Ranger named Travis Kincaid, who had been stationed at the facility for 22 years, which should have been impossible under normal personnel rotation protocols. He had that distinctive appearance you recognize in soldiers who have been deployed beyond their psychological limits, with eyes that have witnessed things their minds cannot fully process and have simply stopped trying to understand. Listen very carefully, he told me during our first operational briefing. What you are about to guard is not aircraft technology. It is not weapons systems. It is not anything you have encountered during your previous military service. The protocols here operate differently than anywhere else. You do not ask questions about what you observe. You do not discuss your observations with anyone outside your immediate security team. And most critically, you never enter the testing chamber without explicit authorization and complete protective protocols in place. Protective protocols against what I asked. Kincaid looked at me with an expression that resembled pity. "You will understand after your first observation shift," he said. The observation station for Silo 7 was a control room with reinforced one-way glass overlooking what they designated the testing chamber, which was roughly the dimensions of a regulation basketball court, with walls covered in some metallic composite material that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. In the center of that chamber sat an object approximately 12 feet in diameter with a roughly spherical shape, but covered in geometric patterns that physically hurt to observe directly, as though your eyes could not maintain proper focus on its actual form. "What is that thing?" I asked Kincaid. "We call it the artifact," he replied. "Recovered in 1989 from a location I am not authorized to disclose. No identifying marks, no visible power source. No construction method that our materials scientists can explain using current metallurgical knowledge. It has been sitting in this chamber for 30 years, and we still have no definitive answers about who created it or what its intended function might be. If we do not understand what it does, why am I here guarding it?" I asked. "Because sometimes it activates," Kincaid said, gesturing toward the monitoring equipment. "And when it activates, anyone in the chamber during that activation experiences effects that are highly problematic." Over my first week at the facility, I came to understand exactly what problematic meant in their terminology. The artifact would activate at seemingly random intervals anywhere from once per day to once per week, with no discernible pattern that could be predicted or controlled. Each activation followed an identical sequence beginning with a low-frequency vibration that you felt in your skeletal structure, more than heard with your ears, followed by a visible distortion in the air surrounding the object similar to heat shimmer, except the temperature actually dropped during these events. During my third shift, I witnessed my first activation event firsthand. 2 research scientists were inside the chamber collecting readings with equipment I did not recognize when the subsonic hum began, and they immediately started moving toward the exit protocols. One of them, a physicist named Dr. Elias Ward, was not fast enough and remained within 15 feet of the artifact when the distortion effect intensified dramatically. What happened next forced me to question every assumption I had ever made about the nature of reality. Dr. Ward stopped moving entirely, as though someone had paused a video recording mid-frame, but his eyes continued moving back and forth with unmistakable panic visible in his expression. Through the observation glass, I could see his mouth attempting to form words, but no sound emerged from his throat. The distortion field around the artifact pulsed once, then twice, and Dr. Ward collapsed to the chamber floor. The medical response team extracted him within 90 seconds, but the psychological damage was already done. When Dr. Ward regained consciousness in the facility medical wing, he was no longer the same person who had entered that chamber. He could speak and move and perform basic cognitive functions, but something fundamental about his consciousness had been altered. I was assigned to his security detail during the mandatory 72-hour observation period that followed every exposure incident, and that is where I learned what the Gatekeeper project was truly designed to accomplish. Dr. Ward would sit motionless in his observation room, staring at empty space and occasionally speaking in fragmented sentences that the psychiatric staff carefully documented. Most of his statements were incoherent, but some were terrifying in their specificity. "The doors are opening," he said on the second day of observation. "Not just here, but everywhere across multiple locations. The frequency is changing, and they are going to notice we are making too much noise in dimensions we do not understand." "Who is going to notice, Dr. Ward?" the psychiatric evaluator asked. "The things that exist in the spaces between spaces," he replied. "The ones who built the gates originally. We are not supposed to open them from this side of reality. That is the rule. That has always been the rule. The psychiatric team classified his statements as post-traumatic psychosis and recommended heavy sedation and long-term psychological observation. But I recognized something in Dr. Ward's expression that I had seen before in combat veterans who had witnessed genuine horrors. This was not a man experiencing delusions. This was a man who had seen something fundamentally true and terrifying, and was desperately trying to communicate that truth before they chemically suppressed his memories. They transferred Dr. Ward out of the facility after 5 days. I never saw him again. When I asked Kincaid what happened to exposure victims after they left the facility, he simply said they are taken care of, and that is all you need to know. I discovered this truth through Logan Voss, a research physicist who had been stationed at the facility for 11 years and possessed clearance levels high enough to access analytical data that security personnel were never supposed to see. He began leaving notes for me in locations he knew I would find during my regular patrol routes. Nothing obvious or incriminating, just fragments of information that would seem meaningless to anyone who was not actively tracking the patterns I had begun to notice. The frequency spectrum recorded during activation events matches nothing found in nature one-note read, but it precisely matches signal patterns we have detected originating from deep space. Signals that should not exist according to our current understanding of physics. Another note stated that exposure victims consistently reported seeing identical impossible structures and geometric patterns that did not conform to three-dimensional spatial rules. This is not mass hallucination. This is perception of something genuinely real that human neurology was never designed to process. The final note I received from Voss was different from all the others. It was not hidden along my patrol route, but taped directly to my locker, which should have been impossible given the facility's security protocols. The note said they know I have been documenting the correlation data between equipment tests and activation events. They are going to transfer me out before I can complete my analysis. If you want to understand what the Gatekeeper project truly accomplishes, then watch the activation scheduled for 0300 hours on Friday. Do not observe from the standard observation post. Position yourself at the northeast corner of the chamber floor outside the marked safe zone perimeter. You will see what they do not want anyone to see. Voss was transferred out that same afternoon. His personal belongings were removed from his quarters within an hour. When I attempted to access his research files through the system, I discovered they had been completely purged from all databases. I should have reported the notes immediately, should have flagged the obvious security breach, should have performed my duties and maintained proper protocols, but 18 years of military service had taught me one essential lesson. When someone with comprehensive access goes out of their way to warn you about something, you pay very close attention. Friday at 2:47 hours, I positioned myself exactly where Voss had indicated in direct violation of every safety protocol and security regulation. The northeast corner of the testing chamber floor, 15 feet outside the marked safe zone, with an unobstructed line of sight to the artifact. At 300 hours precisely, the scheduled activation began. The subsonic hum started as it always did. That deep vibration that made your teeth ache and caused your vision to blur at the edges. The distortion effect around the artifact intensified rapidly. Heat shimmer that moved in Way's heat should not move following patterns that could not exist in normal three-dimensional space. And then I saw exactly what Voss had wanted me to witness. When you position yourself at the correct angle outside the safe zone, but not close enough for full exposure effects, you can see through the distortion field. Not with perfect clarity, not completely, but enough to understand what the artifact actually does when it activates. It creates a window, a rupture in space that opens onto somewhere else, somewhere that is not part of our reality at all. Through that window, I saw structures. Vast, impossible architecture that seemed to exist simultaneously in more dimensions than three. Geometric patterns that moved and shifted and reconfigured themselves according to mathematical rules that made my brain ache trying to comprehend them. And in the spaces between those structures, I saw things moving, not aliens in the way science fiction depicts them, not physical beings in any conventional sense, more like presences, intelligence without physical form, awareness without biological body, something that existed as pure information or consciousness or some fundamental property of reality that we do not have adequate language to describe, and they saw me. I felt their attention focus on my exact position with the weight of something cosmic, something so far beyond human scale that the mere fact of being noticed by it should have shattered my sanity completely. They looked through that window, through the artifact that we had been carelessly activating for 3 decades, and they saw that humans had discovered a gate and were attempting to force it open from our side. The activation lasted 7 seconds according to official facility logs. To me, it felt like hours. When the distortion field finally collapsed and the artifact returned to its dormant state, I was on my knees with blood running from my nose and ears. My tactical computer was registering elevated heart rate and neural activity readings that should have triggered automatic medical alerts, but I had positioned myself outside primary sensor range. Nobody knew I had witnessed what I had witnessed. Nobody except whoever was monitoring facility surveillance systems. And apparently they were not paying sufficient attention at 300 hours on a random Friday morning to notice one security guard standing 15 feet out of proper position. That was my first genuine look at what the Gatekeeper project was actually accomplishing, and it was only the beginning of understanding how completely catastrophic our situation had become. After that night, I could not look at the artifact with the same perspective, could not think about our security protocols as protecting recovered technology that might give us strategic advantages or scientific breakthroughs. We were not guarding some ancient alien relic that could be reverse engineered for tactical applications. We were standing guard beside a door, and we had been knocking on that door for 30 years completely unaware that eventually something was going to answer. The morning after my unauthorized observation, I reported for my regular duty shift expecting to be detained and questioned and possibly court-martialed for violating safety zone regulations, but nothing happened. My shift proceeded with complete normalcy. Kincaid reviewed the overnight activity logs without any comment. The facility continued operating with the same mechanical efficiency it always displayed. Either surveillance had not captured my position breach or someone had decided it was not worth addressing. I was not certain which possibility disturbed me more deeply. What changed was my entire perspective on everything happening at the facility. Once you have seen through that window, once you have felt the attention of something vast and incomprehensible focused directly on you, everything else at the facility becomes transparent, all the compartmentalization, all the security protocols, all the careful documentation of activation events, all of it suddenly revealed its true purpose. We were not researching the artifact, we were feeding it every test, every scan, every attempt to make it perform some useful function. We were actually providing it with more data about us, more information about human technology and human capabilities and human awareness. We were teaching it how to interface with our reality. And through it, we were teaching whatever existed on the other side how to potentially cross over into our dimensional framework. The realization should have sent me directly to Facility Command with a comprehensive security breach report. But military training teaches you certain uncomfortable truths about classified operations. When something is compartmentalized at this extreme level, when protocols exist specifically to prevent personnel from discussing or even acknowledging what they observe, it is because someone higher in the chain of command does not want those observations questioned. They knew. Someone in the command structure understood exactly what the artifact was and what we were doing by repeatedly activating it. And they had decided to continue the program anyway. I needed to understand why, needed to know what possible justification could exist for deliberately opening communication channels with entities that existed outside our dimensional framework. And the only way to obtain those answers was to start asking questions carefully enough that I would not get immediately transferred out like Voss had been. My opportunity came during a routine briefing 6 days after my unauthorized observation. Kincaid was reviewing updated safety protocols when Damon Kearney, one of the newer security team members, asked the question we had all been thinking. "Sir, if the artifact is so dangerous to personnel, why do we continue activating it? Why not simply seal the chamber and leave it in permanent dormant status?" The briefing room went completely silent. In 3 months at the facility, nobody had directly questioned the fundamental purpose of the testing program. Kearney realized his mistake immediately and tried to backtrack, but Kincaid raised his hand to stop him. "That is a fair question," Kincaid said, "and since you have all been cleared to appropriate classification levels, you deserve an honest answer." He pulled up a presentation on the briefing room display screen with classification markers I had never seen before in my entire military career. "The artifact is not the only one," he said. "Between 1947 and 2003, we recovered 17 similar objects from various locations globally. 14 are currently in storage at other secure facilities. 2 were destroyed in testing accidents that resulted in significant casualties. This one, Artifact Omega, is the only one that has remained consistently stable enough for extended study and testing." He advanced to the next slide, showing a world map with 17 marked locations. Each recovery site showed evidence of activation events that occurred naturally without any human intervention. Localized distortions in spacetime, temporary appearances of structures or phenomena that violated known physics, and in 3 documented cases, complete disappearances of human populations within a 5-mile radius of the recovery site location. The implications were staggering. This was not about alien technology we had accidentally stumbled across. This was about something systematically appearing across Earth's surface, something that had been interacting with human populations for at least 70 years, and probably much longer. The Gatekeeper Protocol, Kincaid continued, was established after the disappearance incidents to determine whether these objects represent a threat requiring neutralization or an opportunity requiring exploitation. Every activation test we conduct is designed to gather data that brings us closer to understanding what these things are, where they originate from, and most importantly, whether we can control them. "Control them for what purpose?" I asked, keeping my tone neutral and professional. Kincaid looked directly at me for a long moment. "That is above your current clearance level, Sergeant, but I will tell you this much. If a hostile nation or non-state actor gains control of even one functional artifact and figures out how to weaponize it, before we do, the implications for global security would be absolutely catastrophic." There it was, the justification that made all the risk acceptable to the people running this project. Not scientific curiosity, not a desire to understand the universe, just the same ancient human fear. If we do not figure out how to control this dangerous thing first, then someone else will, and they might use it against us. The briefing continued, but I had heard everything I needed to understand. The Gatekeeper Protocol was not designed to protect humanity from whatever existed on the other side of those windows. It was designed to ensure that we controlled access to that other side regardless of whether opening those windows was wise or safe or compatible with continued human existence. Over the next month, I began documenting everything I observed, not through official channels but in a personal record kept on equipment that was not connected to any facility networks. Every activation event, every exposure incident, every fragment of information I could gather about what the testing program was actually trying to achieve, the pattern became unmistakably clear. Activation frequency was increasing dramatically. During my first month at the facility, the artifact had activated perhaps 8 times total. By my 4th month, we were witnessing activations almost daily and sometimes multiple times per day. And with each activation, the duration was extending. What had started as 3 to 5 second events were now lasting 30 seconds or a full minute, and occasionally even longer. The distortion effects were intensifying as well. Personnel caught in the exposure zones were exhibiting more severe psychological impact, taking longer to stabilize after incidents. and in several documented cases never fully recovering their pre-exposure cognitive baseline. But the testing continued without pause. In fact, it accelerated. Whatever data they were gathering, whatever progress they believed they were making toward control, it was apparently worth the increasing casualties and the steadily deteriorating safety margins. The breaking point came during an activation event on June 17, 2020. I was pulling a standard observation shift when alarms began blaring throughout the facility. Not the normal activation warning signals, but full facility lockdown protocols. Through the observation glass, I watched the artifact activate with an intensity I had never witnessed before. The distortion effect expanded far beyond its normal radius, filling almost half the entire testing chamber. And in that massive distortion field, I could see clearly now what I had only glimpsed during my unauthorized observation. The window was opening wider than ever before. The structures on the other side were visible without needing to position yourself at any specific angle. Geometric impossibilities that caused physical pain to perceive directly. Architecture that seemed to fold in on itself while simultaneously expanding outward into space that should not exist. Patterns that existed in more dimensions than human vision was ever designed to process. And something was coming through, not physically crossing over, not yet, but I could see the attempt, could feel the pressure of something vast trying to force its way from whatever dimensional space it occupied into ours. The air inside the testing chamber warped and twisted in ways that violated basic physics. Monitoring equipment was registering readings that should not be possible under any known scientific framework. The activation lasted 4 minutes and 37 seconds. When it finally collapsed, the testing chamber was physically empty, but something fundamental about the space had changed. The artifact itself looked different. Its geometric patterns more defined and more active somehow, as though it had gained strength from the event. 3 research scientists who had been monitoring the activation from the observation post were immediately hospitalized with what the medical staff designated as perceptual damage. They could see things that were not there according to normal human perception. Or more accurately, they could suddenly perceive things that had always been present, but that human neurology normally filters out of conscious awareness. One of them, a physicist named Dr. Marcus Troy, kept repeating the same phrase during his psychological evaluation. They are already here. They have always been here. We just could not see them until we opened the gate wide enough. That night, I made my final decision. Whatever the gatekeeper protocol was attempting to achieve, whatever control they believed they could establish over the artifact and what it connected to, they were failing catastrophically. The activations were getting stronger, the breaches were opening wider, and something on the other side was learning how to cross over into our reality. I needed to find someone with higher clearance who might actually listen to what I had observed. Someone who could get this information to oversight committees or command structures with authority to override the compartmentalized leadership running these tests. That is when I met Colonel Sarah Mackenzie. She arrived at the facility 3 days after the June 17th incident, brought in as part of a mandatory safety review following the hospitalization of multiple researchers. I had encountered officers like her before during my career. Professional military with enough decorations and classified deployments that they had earned the right to ask hard questions without getting buried in security protocols. I requested a private meeting through proper official channels, citing concerns about security protocol effectiveness. To my surprise, she agreed without hesitation. We met in a conference room that I had personally verified was not under active surveillance, and I told her everything. The unauthorized observation, what I had seen through the distortion field, the increasing activation intensity, my assessment that we were not controlling the artifact so much as feeding it continuous information about our reality. Colonel Mackenzie listened without interrupting, taking no notes, just absorbing every detail I provided. When I finished, she remained quiet for a long time. "You are absolutely right," she finally said, "about all of it. The artifact is a gateway, not a tool we can exploit. The testing program is accelerating the breach, not establishing any meaningful control. And yes, something on the other side is learning how to cross over into our dimensional framework. Then why is nobody stopping the program, I asked. Because she said, and her expression was grim, stopping it would require acknowledging that we have spent 70 years making first contact with something we cannot comprehend or control or negotiate with using any human framework. The people running this program have built their entire careers on the premise that any problem can be solved with sufficient resources and determination. Admitting they are wrong about the artifact means admitting they have potentially endangered the entire planet for the sake of trying to weaponize something they fundamentally do not understand. So what happens now, I asked. Now she said you continue your assignment, document everything you observe, and when I have gathered enough evidence to brief the Joint Chiefs without being dismissed as paranoid, I will need you as my primary witness about what is really happening at Silo 7. Colonel Mackenzie left the facility the next day, but she had given me something I desperately needed, confirmation that I was not insane or misinterpreting what I had observed. The breach was real, the danger was genuine. And somewhere in the classified military command structure, at least one person understood we were running out of time to stop it. 3 weeks after her visit, Colonel Mackenzie died in what was officially reported as a vehicle accident on a Virginia highway. Single-car collision, no witnesses. Vehicle suffered catastrophic mechanical failure that caused her to lose control and drive off an embankment at high speed. I did not believe the official report for a single second. And I knew that whatever evidence she had been gathering, whatever briefing she had been preparing for senior command, it had died with her. That is when I understood the full scope of what I was actually dealing with. This was not simply a misguided research program run by scientists who did not understand the implications of their work. This was something much darker, something that knew exactly what it was doing and was willing to eliminate anyone who threatened to expose it to outside oversight. After Colonel Mackenzie's death, I became far more careful about my activities. No more official meetings, no more paper trails, no more attempts to work through proper channels. If I was going to stop what was happening at Silo 7, it would have to be through methods that could not be traced back to me until I was ready to burn every bridge and accept whatever consequences followed. But being careful did not mean being passive. I started using my security clearance to access areas of the facility I had previously avoided, looking for patterns in the research data that might explain why activation frequency was increasing so dramatically. That is when I discovered the secondary testing program. It was buried deep in maintenance logs that most security personnel never bothered to review, disguised as routine equipment calibration schedules. But when you knew what to look for, the pattern became obvious. Every scheduled calibration event in silos 4, 5, and 6 corresponded exactly with unscheduled activation events in Silo 7. They were not just studying the artifact. They were deliberately triggering it using equipment in adjacent silos. Frequency generators that produced electromagnetic patterns matching the artifact's activation signature. Quantum resonance devices that created localized spacetime distortions similar to what the artifact generated naturally. They were essentially teaching themselves how to open the gates on command. I confronted Kincaid about it during a night shift when we were alone in the security operations station, showed him the correlations I had documented. The evidence that someone was systematically increasing activation frequency despite knowing the psychological damage it was causing to exposed personnel. He looked at the data for a long time without speaking. Then he closed the file and looked at me with eyes that held no surprise whatsoever, only resignation. "You were not supposed to figure that out," he said quietly. "The secondary testing program is classified 3 levels above your clearance. Above mine too, if I am being completely honest. I only know about it because I have been stationed here long enough to recognize the patterns. So you know they are deliberately opening the gates wider," I said. "No, they are risking catastrophic breach events just to gather data on how to control something they do not understand." Kincaid nodded slowly. "I know, and I also know that 4 other facilities globally are running similar programs with their recovered artifacts. This is not just us. This is coordinated at levels that go far beyond the Department of Defense, beyond any single government. Someone decided that the risk of uncontrolled contact is less dangerous than the risk of letting another nation or entity figure out how to weaponize these things first. That is completely insane, I said. That is strategy Kincaid corrected. Mutually assured destruction kept the Cold War from going hot for decades. Maybe the theory here is that if everyone has access to gate technology, then nobody will risk using it aggressively, because the consequences would be unpredictable for all parties involved. Except we are not dealing with nations, I said. We are dealing with entities that exist outside our dimensional framework, entities we cannot negotiate with or threaten or even fully perceive. What good is mutually assured destruction against something that might not even be killable in any conventional sense? Kincaid did not have an answer for that. Nobody did. The entire Gatekeeper protocol was built on assumptions about control and deterrence that might be completely irrelevant to the reality we were actually facing. Over the next 3 months, I watched the secondary testing program accelerate beyond anything I had previously witnessed. The frequency generators in adjacent silos ran almost continuously now, creating a constant low-level resonance that kept the artifact in a semi-active state even when it was not fully engaged. The distortion effects were visible even during dormant periods. A subtle shimmer in the air around the object that suggested the barrier between dimensions was wearing dangerously thin. Personnel casualties were increasing in direct proportion to the testing acceleration. We were losing researchers and technicians at a rate that should have triggered mandatory full operational review, but the program continued without any pause whatsoever. The medical wing was constantly occupied with exposure victims, showing progressively more severe symptoms than anything documented in earlier incidents. Dr. Marcus Troy, the physicist who had been hospitalized after the June incident, had been classified as one of the more stable cases initially. But when I checked on him during a routine security sweep of the medical facilities, I found him in a condition that the staff had designated as perceptual cascade. He was sitting in his observation room, drawing on the walls with whatever materials he could find. But these were not random scribblings or psychotic expressions. They were geometric patterns, mathematical equations, diagrams of structures that seemed to shift and change their configuration when you looked at them from different angles. "They are teaching me," he said when he noticed me watching through the observation window. His voice was calm, almost serene, completely unlike the panicked confusion he had displayed in the immediate aftermath of his exposure. "Every time the artifact activates, I can see a little more clearly, understand a little more of their mathematics, their physics, their way of perceiving reality that extends beyond our limited three-dimensional framework." "Dr. Troy, you need to rest," I said. "Let the medication help you stabilize." He laughed, but there was absolutely no humor in the sound. "Stabilize," he said. "You mean forget. Return to the limited perception that allows humans to function without seeing how thin the barriers really are between dimensions." "But I cannot unsee it, Sergeant. Once you have glimpsed the true structure of reality, once you understand that our 3 dimensions are just a narrow slice of something vastly more complex, you can never go back to pretending the universe is simple and contained." The psychiatric staff increased his sedation levels after that conversation, noting in his medical file that he was becoming increasingly detached from baseline reality parameters. But I had seen the equations he was writing on those walls, and they looked eerily similar to the mathematical notations I had seen in Voss's research documents before they were purged. Whatever Dr. Troy was perceiving, it was not random psychosis. It was information. Knowledge being transmitted through the artifact from entities that understood dimensional physics in ways human science had not even begun to approach. And he was not the only one experiencing this transformation. I started paying closer attention to the long-term exposure victims, the ones who had been exposed multiple times over years of working at the facility. They all exhibited similar patterns: initial confusion and distress following exposure, then a period of apparent recovery and stabilization, followed by a gradual shift into what the medical staff called alternative perception frameworks. They could see things that normal personnel could not perceive, predict activation events seconds before they occurred, described structures and patterns that would later appear in the artifact's distortion field with uncanny accuracy. Some of them even claimed they could feel the presence of the entities on the other side, sense their attention and intentions in ways that normal human perception could not access. The facility was treating this as contamination, as psychological damage that needed to be contained and corrected through medication and isolation. But what if it was not damage at all? What if repeated exposure to the artifact was actually expanding human perception, allowing us to see aspects of reality that we had evolved to filter out because they were not necessary for survival in three-dimensional space? That possibility terrified me more than any threat of hostile invasion, because if the Gatekeeper Protocol was accidentally creating humans with expanded dimensional awareness, humans who could perceive and potentially interact with the entities on the other side, then we were not just opening doors. We were transforming ourselves into something that could walk through those doors. And we were doing it without any understanding of what that transformation might cost. What we might lose of our humanity in the process of gaining perception beyond normal human limits. I tried to document these observations, tried to compile evidence that the exposure effects might be something other than simple neurological damage. But without medical clearance or research credentials, I had no way to verify my theories or present them to anyone who might take them seriously. Then in September 2021, something happened that changed everything about my understanding. One of the long-term exposure victims, a researcher named Dr. Ellen Vasquez, escaped from the medical wing. Security protocols were activated immediately, but she was not trying to leave the facility. She was heading directly towards Silo 7, moving with purpose and confidence through restricted areas, as if she knew exactly where every camera and guard post was positioned. I was part of the security team that intercepted her just outside the testing chamber entrance. She did not resist, did not try to fight or flee. She just looked at us with eyes that seemed to see through us, past us, into dimensions we could not perceive. "It is almost ready," she said calmly. "The frequency is stabilizing across multiple dimensional layers. The entities have been preparing their side of the gateway, learning our dimensional parameters, adapting their perceptual framework to be compatible with ours. When the next major activation occurs, the breach will not close. The gate will stay open permanently, and they will finally be able to cross over fully into our reality." The security team treated this as delusional rambling, sedated her immediately, returned her to medical containment with increased restrictions. But I had seen the absolute certainty in her expression, heard the specificity in her predictions. This was not psychosis. This was someone who had been fundamentally changed by exposure to the artifact, who had gained access to information that normal human perception could not detect. And if she was right, if the entities on the other side were actively working to stabilize the breach, then the Gatekeeper Protocol was not controlling anything. We were just responding to a process that had been initiated long before we started our testing program, possibly decades or centuries ago when the artifacts first appeared on Earth's surface. We were not opening the gates. We were just accelerating something that was always going to happen, something that had been planned and prepared by intelligences that operated on timescales and with purposes we could not begin to comprehend. That realization, that understanding that we might be completely irrelevant to a process we thought we were controlling, made everything else fall into perspective. The secondary testing program, the acceleration of activations, the casualties and transformations we were witnessing, none of it mattered in the larger context. We were just noise in a signal that had been transmitting for far longer than human civilization had existed. The only question was whether we would be ready when the gate finally opened permanently, whether we would choose to meet what came through with understanding or with fear. The opportunity to find out came in October 2021 during the largest activation event the facility had ever recorded, October 23rd, 2021 at 21:47 hours. I was pulling evening security rotation when every alarm in Silo 7 activated simultaneously. Not the standard activation warning, not even the containment breach protocol. This was something I had never heard before in all my time at the facility. The facility, wide evacuation signal. Through the observation post glass, I could see exactly why. The artifact was not just activating, it was opening. The distortion effect had expanded to fill the entire testing chamber from floor to ceiling. And through it, the structures on the other side were more visible than ever before. Vast geometric architectures that seemed to exist simultaneously in multiple dimensions, moving and reconfiguring according to rules that made my head ache just trying to track their movements. But more disturbing than the structures were the presences, the intelligence without physical form that I had glimpsed during my unauthorized observation was now clearly visible through the breach. Multiple entities, if you could call them that, moving through that impossible space with obvious purpose and direction, and they were coming toward our side of the window. Kincaid was shouting evacuation orders, but I could not move, could not look away from what was happening in that chamber. Because for the first time I understood what these entities actually were. They were not aliens from another planet, not extraterrestrial visitors or ancient cosmic beings. They were something that existed in space that our reality overlapped with but normally could not interact with. Different dimensional frameworks that occupied the same location as Earth, but at angles to our three-dimensional space that made them invisible, intangible, undetectable by any human sense or scientific instrument. Until we built doors, until we found the artifacts and started deliberately activating them, creating windows between our reality and theirs, the breach lasted 17 minutes. In that time, I watched 3 of those entities come close enough to the window that I could almost perceive their actual structure. They were not hostile in any way I could recognize. There was no aggression, no malevolence, just curiosity. The same kind of interest you might show if you discovered ants had somehow figured out how to knock on your door and were trying to communicate. When the activation finally collapsed and the artifact returned to dormant status, the testing chamber was fundamentally altered. The walls showed patterns that had not been there before. Geometric designs burned into the metallic composite at molecular depth. The air itself seemed different, like the atmospheric composition in the chamber was not quite the same mixture it should be, and the artifact had changed. Its surface was covered in symbols now, glowing faintly with some internal light source. Not written language, but something more fundamental. Mathematical relationships maybe, or physical laws expressed as geometric patterns. The facility went into complete lockdown mode immediately following the 17-minute breach. All research activities suspended indefinitely, all activation tests canceled without exception. All personnel restricted to essential duties only while assessment teams tried to determine what had happened and whether it was safe to continue any operations. That is when I found Voss's final message. It was not hidden in my usual patrol route. It was in my personal quarters taped to the inside of my locker where only I would find it. Written on paper that had yellowed with age, dated 3 days before he had been transferred out of the facility. Mason, it read, "If you are reading this, then I am either dead or reassigned permanently to somewhere that I cannot risk communicating from. What you saw during the unauthorized observation was real. What you are starting to understand about the Gatekeeper protocol is accurate. But there is more you need to know. The artifacts are not recovered technology. They are planted, deliberately placed across Earth's surface by the entities that exist on the other side, not as weapons or invasion tools, but as communication devices. They want contact. They have been trying to establish it for centuries, maybe longer. Every mythology about demons and angels and beings from other realms. Every religious experience of divine presence or cosmic awareness. Those were probably brief, accidental connections to the reality that these entities inhabit. The artifacts were supposed to make that connection stable and controlled. But we have spent 70 years treating them as threats or resources to exploit, rather than as the communication devices they actually are. And now we have finally activated them enough that the entities on the other side are starting to respond in ways we can detect and measure. The question is not whether contact is coming, it is coming. The question is whether it happens through controlled communication or through breaches that we cannot manage. The Gatekeeper Protocol was supposed to prevent the latter, but I think it is actually accelerating it. If you are reading this, it means something significant has happened, a major breach probably. The entities attempting to fully cross over. When that happens, you will have a choice. Help the facility continue trying to control something they do not understand. Or do what I could not. Get this information to people outside the compartmentalized chain of command. Make sure someone with real authority knows that first contact is not coming someday, it is already here. We have just been too focused on trying to weaponize it to notice that we are the ones being studied. The note was signed with coordinates, a location in the Nevada desert 60 miles from the facility where Voss had apparently cached additional documentation before his transfer. I memorized the coordinates and burned the note immediately. Whatever evidence Voss had compiled, it was my only chance of getting this information outside the security apparatus that had buried Colonel Mackenzie and silenced everyone else who had questioned the program. But retrieving that cache would mean going absent without leave from a facility that officially did not exist, stealing classified information about a program that was compartmentalized above top secret, and essentially ending my military career while becoming a federal fugitive. The alternative was continuing to stand guard while the Gatekeeper Protocol opened doors that could not be closed, making contact with entities we did not understand, and potentially triggering breaches that could cascade beyond anyone's ability to contain. It was not really a choice at all. On November 3, 2021, during a shift rotation that gave me 6 hours outside the secure zone, I drove into the Nevada desert following Voss's coordinates. The cache was buried beneath a rock formation that had probably been there for millennia, wrapped in waterproof containers designed to survive harsh conditions indefinitely. Inside were 3 things: a hard drive containing what appeared to be decades of classified research on the artifacts, a detailed analysis of activation patterns showing clear evidence that the events were being deliberately triggered rather than occurring naturally, and a list of names, scientists, military officers, government officials who had raised concerns about the Gatekeeper Protocol over the past 30 years. 17 names total, 12 were marked deceased, 3 were listed as reassigned to undisclosed locations. 2, including Voss himself, were marked as contained. That is when I understood the full horror of what I had been part of. The Gatekeeper Protocol was not just about controlling the artifacts. It was about controlling anyone who understood what they really were and what opening those gates might mean. A systematic program of elimination or isolation targeting anyone who threatened to expose the truth. I could not take the evidence back to the facility, could not trust anyone in the official chain of command. The only option was to do what Colonel Mackenzie had been trying to do: get this information to people outside the military structure, who might actually have the authority and independence to act on it. I never went back to Area 51. Instead, I copied the data from Voss's drive onto encrypted storage and mailed it to 3 different investigative journalists known for handling classified information responsibly. Then I drove to a small town in Arizona and disappeared into the kind of anonymous existence that people with my training can maintain indefinitely. 2 months later, the first stories started appearing. Not the dramatic exposes I had hoped for, but careful sourced articles about alleged classified programs at rumored Nevada facilities, citing unverified documents that suggested the government had been testing recovered technologies with possible connections to unexplained phenomena. The stories got buried quickly, dismissed as conspiracy theories, denied through official channels, but the information was out there. People were asking questions. And somewhere in the security apparatus that had been protecting the Gatekeeper Protocol for 7 decades, someone was probably scrambling to do damage control. I am recording this testimony 3 years after going absent without leave. I have moved locations 17 times, changed my appearance enough that facial recognition software will not work. used every evasion technique I learned in 18 years of Special Forces operations to stay ahead of whoever might be looking for me. But I know it is only a matter of time before they find me. People do not just walk away from programs at that classification level. The fact that I have lasted this long probably means they are more focused on containing the breach than hunting one former security guard who stole some files. Because here is what I learned in my final weeks monitoring Silo 7's activity logs from outside the facility. The activations have not stopped. If anything, they have accelerated beyond anything I witnessed while stationed there. The artifact is now activating multiple times daily, each event lasting longer than the last, each breach opening wider than before, whatever the entities on the other side want, whatever purpose those communication devices were meant to serve. We have moved past the point where controlled contact is possible. The doors are open, the windows are widening, and something that exists at angles to our reality is learning how to cross over into our dimensional framework. I do not know if that is a threat or an opportunity. Do not know if these entities are dangerous or benevolent or simply indifferent to human concerns. What I know is that first contact is coming, not in some distant future when we are prepared for it, but soon. Maybe months, maybe weeks, and when it happens, the people in charge will have two choices. Admit they have been hiding this for 70 years and beg these entities for understanding. Or try to fight something that exists in dimensions we can barely perceive using weapons designed for three-dimensional warfare. I know which option they will choose. It is the same option they have chosen at every step of the Gatekeeper protocol. Control through force, exploitation through technology, security through isolation. It will not work. You cannot control something that does not exist fully in your reality. You cannot weaponize forces that operate according to physical laws you do not comprehend. You cannot fight entities that can simply step sideways out of your dimensional framework and be as untouchable as ghosts. The Gatekeeper protocol was supposed to protect humanity from threats beyond our understanding. Instead, it turned us into the threat. We found doors that were meant for communication and tried to turn them into weapons. We encountered intelligence that existed peacefully in spaces adjacent to ours and decided we needed to control or contain it. And now, after 70 years of aggressive research and deliberate activation, we have finally gotten their attention. The entities on the other side of those gates, the intelligences that inhabit dimensions we cannot fully perceive. They are aware of us now. They know we have found the artifacts. They know we have been opening the gates, and they are coming to see what we want, to understand why we have been knocking on their door for 7 decades. I hope to God that when they arrive, someone in authority has the wisdom to extend a hand instead of a weapon, because I have seen what exists on the other side of those gates. I have felt their attention focused on our reality. And I know with absolute certainty that if we choose violence, if we try to fight or contain or control them, we will lose. Not because they are stronger or more advanced, though they probably are, but because they exist in a framework of reality that makes conventional warfare meaningless. You cannot bomb something that does not fully exist in three-dimensional space. You cannot contain intelligence that can move through dimensions we cannot detect. The only question now is whether humanity can accept that we are not the dominant intelligence in our corner of reality. Whether we can admit that the universe is stranger than we imagined, that other forms of awareness exist in spaces adjacent to ours, and that opening communication with them might require humility instead of hubris. I do not know if we are capable of that kind of humility. 70 years of the Gatekeeper protocol suggest we are not, but I am recording this testimony anyway, sending it out through channels that might reach people who can make different choices than the ones that brought us to this point. Because someone needs to know what is really happening at Silo 7. Someone needs to understand that first contact is not a future possibility. It is happening now, has been happening for years. We have just been too focused on trying to control it to notice that we are the ones being observed. Studied, evaluated by intelligences that have been patiently waiting for us to stop treating their communication devices as threats. The gates are open, the entities are crossing over, and what happens next depends on whether we can finally accept that we are not alone in reality. Just isolated in one small dimensional slice of something vastly larger. I was a special forces operator who spent 2 years guarding a door we did not understand, watching scientists try to weaponize something we could not control, serving a protocol designed to protect humanity from threats that we ourselves had provoked. Now I am a fugitive with a hard drive full of classified information and a testimony that most people will dismiss as paranoid conspiracy theory. But somewhere in Nevada, 300 feet below the desert floor, the artifact is still activating. The gates are still opening wider, and something vast and incomprehensible is preparing to step through. When that happens, when first contact finally occurs in a way that cannot be hidden or denied or controlled, remember this: we had 70 years to prepare, 70 years to approach this moment with wisdom and humility. Instead, we spent that time trying to turn communication into weapons and curiosity into control. Whatever comes next, whatever the entities from those adjacent dimensions decide to do when they fully cross into our reality, we earned it, not through malice but through the same fear-driven need for control that has defined every aspect of the Gatekeeper protocol. I hope that is not our epitaph. I hope someone somewhere in the chain of command has the courage to choose a different path before it is too late. But I have spent 18 years in military service, and I have learned one truth about institutions. They do not change direction easily. They do not admit mistakes readily, and they almost never choose humility when control seems like an option. So I am not optimistic, but I am still telling this story, still hoping that somewhere someone will hear it and understand that the choice we make in the next few months might determine whether humanity enters a new age of cosmic awareness or becomes a cautionary tale for whoever inherits Earth after we are gone. The Gatekeeper protocol thought it was protecting us. It was actually isolating us, keeping us trapped in ignorance while something magnificent and terrifying waited patiently for us to open our eyes. Now our eyes are opening. The question is whether we can handle what we see. My name is Captain Rebel, Staff Sergeant, United States Army Special Forces, absent without leave since November 2021. Wanted for theft of classified information and violation of approximately 40 different national security statutes. And I am telling you that everything you think you know about Area 51 is wrong. The secrets they are hiding are not about alien technology or crashed spacecraft. They are about doors we opened without understanding what was on the other side, about entities we contacted without knowing how to communicate, about a reality so much stranger than we imagined that even seeing it clearly could break human minds. The gates are open. The breach is expanding. First contact is coming. And after 70 years of treating it as a threat to control, we are about to discover whether we are ready to meet it as partners instead. I hope we are. But I spent 2 years at Silo 7, and I saw how we respond to things we do not understand. We try to weaponize them. We try to contain them. We try to control them. And when that does not work, we pretend they do not exist. That will not be an option much longer. This is my testimony. This is what I witnessed. This is the truth about the Gatekeeper project. Do with it what you will, but know that the countdown has already started. The entities are coming, and whether we greet them as enemies or allies will determine everything that follows. I have seen both possibilities in my nightmares since leaving the facility. In one version, we meet them with weapons drawn, treat their arrival as an invasion, deploy every military asset we have against beings that exist partially outside our dimensional framework. The result is catastrophic, not because they retaliate with superior force, but because our weapons simply cannot affect targets that can shift between dimensions at will. We exhaust ourselves fighting shadows while they observe our aggression with what might be disappointment or pity. In the other version, we approach them with open hands and open minds, acknowledge that we have been recklessly activating their communication devices without understanding their purpose, ask for forgiveness and guidance. Offer to learn their language and their way of perceiving reality. In this version, they respond with patience. Begin teaching us how to expand our perception beyond 3 dimensions. Show us technologies and sciences that operate on principles we never imagined. Help us evolve into something greater than we currently are. I do not know which version will become reality. That choice belongs to people with far more authority than I ever had. But I know that we are running out of time to make that choice consciously. The activation frequency at Silo 7 has reached critical levels. The breach is no longer fully closing between events. The barrier between dimensions is collapsing, and soon, very soon, the entities will not need our artifacts to cross over. They will simply step through into our world, and we will have to deal with whatever intentions they bring. I have spent 3 years preparing for that moment, not by stockpiling weapons or building fortifications. Those would be useless against beings that exist in more dimensions than we can perceive. Instead, I have been preparing mentally and spiritually, learning meditation techniques that might help expand human consciousness, studying ancient texts that describe encounters with beings from other realms, trying to understand how our ancestors might have perceived these same entities before we had the language of modern science to describe them. Because I believe Voss was right. These encounters have been happening throughout human history. Every religious vision, every mystical experience, every account of angels or demons or spirits, these were probably brief accidental contacts with the dimensional framework these entities inhabit. Our ancestors interpreted them through the cultural lens available to them, called them gods or devils or supernatural beings, built entire belief systems around fragmentary glimpses of a reality they could not fully comprehend. We have the opportunity to do better, to approach this contact with scientific rigor and spiritual humility, to learn from these entities instead of fearing them, to expand our understanding of reality instead of trying to force reality to conform to our limited perceptions. But that opportunity is closing rapidly. Every activation at Silo 7, every test of the secondary frequency generators, every attempt to weaponize or control the artifacts, these push us closer to a confrontation instead of a conversation. And I fear that by the time the people in charge realize their mistake, it will be too late to change course. That is why I am releasing this testimony now, why I am risking exposure and capture to get this information into public awareness. Because the decision about how humanity responds to first contact should not be made by a handful of compartmentalized military officials operating in secret. It should be a collective choice, made with full knowledge of what we are dealing with, made with input from scientists and philosophers and spiritual leaders, made with the understanding that this moment will define our species for generations to come. I do not expect everyone to believe what I am telling you. I know how this sounds. A disgraced soldier making wild claims about interdimensional entities and government cover-ups. It fits perfectly into the conspiracy theory framework that people use to dismiss uncomfortable truths. But I am not asking you to believe me on faith. I am asking you to pay attention. Watch for signs of increased military activity in Nevada. Monitor for reports of unexplained phenomena near government facilities. Look for patterns in the data that suggest something unprecedented is happening. The evidence is there if you know where to look. Seismic anomalies around Groom Lake that do not correspond to any known geological activity. Electromagnetic disturbances that interfere with civilian aviation and communications. Unusual personnel movements and security escalations at facilities that officially do not exist. These are not random events. They are symptoms of a breach that is expanding beyond anyone's ability to contain. And when that breach finally opens completely, when the entities cross over in a way that cannot be hidden or denied, you will remember this testimony. You will understand that someone tried to warn you, tried to give you the information you needed to prepare mentally and emotionally for a reality that is stranger than you imagined. I hope that knowledge helps. I hope it allows you to respond with curiosity instead of fear, with openness instead of aggression, with the understanding that we are not being invaded but contacted. not being threatened but offered an opportunity to evolve beyond our current limitations. Because that is what I believe this is ultimately about, not conquest or destruction but communication and transformation. The entities on the other side of those gates are not our enemies, they are our neighbors in a larger reality. They have been trying to reach us for centuries, and we have finally developed the technology to hear them knocking. The question is whether we will open the door with weapons drawn or with open hands. Whether we will treat this as a threat to be neutralized or an opportunity to be embraced. Whether we will choose fear or courage, isolation or connection, control or understanding, I know which choice I would make. I have seen what exists on the other side of those gates. I have felt their curiosity and patience. I have witnessed the beauty of geometric patterns that exist in more dimensions than 3. And I believe that what they offer us is worth the risk of expanding our perception beyond the comfortable limits of human experience. But I am just one voice, one testimony among billions. My choice alone cannot determine how humanity responds to this moment. That choice belongs to all of us collectively, and it is a choice we will have to make very soon. The gates are opening. The breach is expanding. The entities are preparing to cross over. And we are running out of time to decide who we want to be when we finally meet them face to face. Or whatever passes for face when dealing with beings that exist partially outside our dimensional framework. I wish I could tell you that I have answers, that my time at Silo 7 gave me some special insight into how we should handle first contact with interdimensional entities. But the truth is I am as uncertain as anyone else about what comes next. All I have is what I witnessed, what I learned, and the growing conviction that the Gatekeeper Protocol represents everything we need to avoid if we hope to survive this encounter intact. The protocol was built on fear, on the assumption that anything unknown must be either controlled or destroyed, on the belief that humanity's safety depends on maintaining dominance over every force we encounter. These assumptions might work when dealing with conventional threats, other nations, terrorist organizations, military technologies that operate within understood physical parameters, but they are catastrophically inadequate when dealing with entities that exist outside our dimensional framework. Entities that can perceive and manipulate aspects of reality that we can barely detect. Entities that have been patient enough to wait centuries for us to develop the capacity for meaningful communication. I think about Dr. Marcus Troy often, about the equations he was writing on the walls of his observation room, about the certainty in his voice when he said they are teaching me, about the possibility that exposure to the artifact was not damaging his mind, but expanding it beyond normal human limitations. What if the psychiatric staff was wrong? What if the perceptual changes experienced by exposure victims were not symptoms of trauma, but signs of transformation? What if these entities have been trying to help us evolve, to show us how to perceive reality as they do, to invite us into a larger cosmic community that exists in dimensions we never knew were there? The thought terrifies me because accepting it means acknowledging that everything the Gatekeeper Protocol has done for 70 years, every test, every activation, every attempt at control, has been exactly the wrong approach. We have been treating teachers as threats, treating invitations as invasions, treating opportunities for growth as dangers requiring neutralization, and now we are running out of time to correct that catastrophic misunderstanding. I monitor the reports when I can, encrypted communications intercepted from military channels, leaked documents that appear briefly on obscure websites before being scrubbed, eyewitness accounts from people living near government facilities who report strange phenomena they cannot explain. The activation frequency continues to increase. Events that once happened weekly now occur hourly. The distortion effects are visible from outside the facility now. Hikers in the Nevada desert report seeing strange lights and geometric patterns in the sky above areas that are supposed to be restricted. Civilian aircraft are being rerouted around expanding no-fly zones. Seismic sensors are detecting vibrations that do not match any known geological patterns. The breach is expanding, and soon it will expand beyond the government's ability to hide or deny. When that happens, When undeniable evidence of interdimensional contact becomes public knowledge, the world will face a choice similar to the one I faced in that observation post, except that reality is stranger than we imagined and adapt accordingly. Or retreat into denial and fear and aggression. I hope we choose adaptation. Hope that humanity has enough collective wisdom to recognize an opportunity when it presents itself, but I am not confident. I have seen how institutions respond to threats they do not understand, how quickly fear overrides curiosity, how easily the unknown becomes the enemy in the minds of people who are trained to see the world through frameworks of conflict and competition. The military will want to fight. We'll see the entities as hostile forces requiring military response. We'll deploy weapons designed to kill human enemies against beings that might not even be killable in any conventional sense. The politicians will want to control the narrative. Will classify and compartmentalize and spin the truth until it fits whatever political agenda serves their interests. Will prioritize their own power over humanity's collective well-being. The media will want sensationalism, will focus on fear and conflict because those drive engagement, will reduce complex interdimensional contact to simple as verses, them narratives that fit into sound bites and headlines. And the public, already overwhelmed by information, already struggling to distinguish truth from fiction in a world of manufactured narratives, will retreat into whatever belief system offers the most comfort. Whether that comfort comes from denial or from faith or from conspiracy theories that provide simple explanations for complex realities, I understand all of this, understand why it happens, understand the psychological and institutional forces that push us toward fear instead of curiosity. But understanding does not make it less frustrating, does not make me less desperate to find some way to shift the trajectory before we lock ourselves into a confrontational stance that could define human-entity relations for generations. That is why I am releasing this testimony, not because I think it will change everything, not because I believe one soldier's story will override 70 years of institutional momentum, but because it might reach someone who has the capacity to make different choices. Someone in a position of authority who reads this and recognizes the truth in what I am describing, someone who has witnessed similar phenomena and has been afraid to speak up, someone who has the courage to challenge the gatekeeper protocol before it is too late. Or maybe it will just reach ordinary people, people who read this and start asking questions, people who demand transparency from their governments, people who refuse to accept the official narratives that are designed to maintain control rather than convey truth. Because ultimately, the choice about how we respond to first contact should not belong to a compartmentalized military program. It should belong to all of us, and we cannot make informed choices if we do not have access to the truth about what is happening. I know the risks of releasing this information. Know that I am painting an even larger target on myself. Know that there are people in the security apparatus who would very much like to silence me permanently. But I have spent 3 years living as a fugitive, 3 years looking over my shoulder, 3 years knowing that every day might be my last day of freedom, and in that time I have come to accept that some things are worth the risk. Some truths are important enough that they need to be told regardless of personal consequences. This is one of those truths. We are not alone in reality. We share our dimensional space with entities that exist at angles to our perception. Entities that have been trying to communicate with us for centuries. Entities that placed artifacts across Earth's surface as communication devices. And we have spent 70 years treating those communication devices as weapons or threats. Activating them without understanding their purpose, studying them without recognizing their function, opening gates without comprehending what we were inviting through. Now those entities are responding, are preparing to cross over fully into our reality, are coming to see why we have been knocking on their door for 7 decades, and how we greet them will determine everything that follows. I have made my choice. I choose curiosity over fear, communication over conflict, humility over hubris. I choose to believe that entities patient enough to wait centuries for contact, sophisticated enough to create communication devices we still barely understand, aware enough to expand human perception rather than simply destroying minds that touch their technology. These entities deserve to be approached as potential teachers rather than definite threats. I choose to believe that we are being offered an opportunity, not to be conquered or destroyed, but to evolve, to expand our understanding of reality, to join a larger cosmic community that exists in dimensions we are only beginning to perceive. I choose to believe that the fear driving the Gatekeeper protocol is not wisdom but limitation, not protection but isolation, not strength but weakness masquerading as control. And I choose to share this testimony in the hope that others will make similar choices, will question the official narratives, will demand transparency and truth, will approach the unknown with curiosity rather than aggression, because if enough people make that choice, if enough voices demand a different approach, maybe we can shift the trajectory before it is too late. Maybe we can transform first contact from a confrontation into a conversation. Maybe we can prove that humanity is capable of wisdom as well as fear. I do not know if this testimony will make any difference. Do not know if anyone will believe what I am saying or act on it, even if they do believe. But I know that I had to try, had to speak the truth as I understand it, had to offer an alternative to the fear-based narrative that has dominated the Gatekeeper protocol for 70 years. The gates are open, the entities are coming, and we are running out of time to decide who we want to be when we meet them. I hope we choose to be curious, to be humble, to be open to possibilities that challenge everything we thought we knew about reality. I hope we choose to be worthy of contact with beings that have waited patiently for us to grow wise enough to understand what they are offering. I hope we choose to evolve rather than entrench, to communicate rather than combat, to learn rather than fear. But hope is not certainty, and I have spent enough time in military service to know that institutions rarely choose wisdom when fear seems safer. So I am releasing this testimony with hope but without illusions, knowing it might help but might also be ignored, knowing it might reach the right people but might also simply add to the noise, knowing it might change everything or change nothing at all. But at least I will have tried. At least I will have spoken the truth as I witnessed it. At least I will have offered an alternative vision of what first contact could be if we have the courage to approach it with open minds and open hearts. The choice is yours now. Believe me or dismiss me. Act on this information or ignore it. Demand truth from your governments or accept the official narratives. But whatever you choose, understand that the choice has consequences. Understand that we are living through a pivotal moment in human history. Understand that what happens next will be determined by the collective choices we make right now. The gates are open. First contact is coming. And after 70 years of the Gatekeeper protocol treating it as a threat, we are about to discover whether we can meet it as an opportunity instead. I hope we can. I truly hope we can, because I have seen what exists on the other side of those gates. And it is magnificent and terrifying and utterly unlike anything human minds were designed to comprehend. But it is also patient, curious, possibly even benevolent in ways we do not yet understand. And if we can find the courage to meet it with humility rather than hubris, with curiosity rather than fear, with openness rather than aggression, then maybe we can transform this moment from humanity's end into humanity's beginning, the beginning of a new age, a new understanding. A new relationship with reality itself. That is what I choose to believe. That is the hope I carry as I continue evading capture and moving through shadows and waiting for the day when the breach finally opens completely and the truth becomes undeniable. And when that day comes, when the entities cross over and the gates stay open and humanity finally has to confront the reality of interdimensional contact, I hope this testimony will be remembered, will be understood, will help guide our response toward wisdom rather than fear. That is all I can do now. Tell the truth, offer hope, and trust that somewhere someone will hear this message and choose to act on it before we lock ourselves into a conflict we cannot win against entities we never needed to fight. The countdown has started, the gates are opening, and our time to choose is running out. Choose wisely. What do you think really lies beneath Area 51? Share your thoughts in the comments below. And if this testimony resonated with you, hit that subscribe button, because the truth about what is coming deserves to be heard. Stay vigilant.